The '67 Mustang, christened Eleanor, but known to Jason simply as the Machine, devoured the asphalt. Sunlight bounced off its meticulously restored candy apple red finish, a mirror reflecting the endless blue sky of the Nevada desert. He kept the speedometer hovering just below 70, the rumble of the engine a comforting counterpoint to the wind whistling past the open windows. The air, dry and hot, carried the scent of sagebrush and sun-baked earth, a smell he'd come to associate with freedom. He gripped the worn leather steering wheel, his knuckles white. The lines etched around his eyes, usually softened by a wry smile, were today deepened by a quiet intensity. He was a man trying to outrun something, and the Mustang was his steed. A fly buzzed lazily around the cabin, landing briefly on the dashboard before flitting out the window. Jason didn't flinch. He was used to unwelcome intrusions. He reached for the flask tucked into the console, the cool metal a welcome touch against his calloused fingers. He unscrewed the cap, the scent of aged bourbon filling the air. A small sip, just enough to take the edge off. He hadn't touched the stuff in years, not regularly anyway. But today felt different. Today felt like a reckoning. For a fleeting moment, the sun seemed to dim. A fragmented image flashed across his mind. The cold, sterile light of an operating room. The frantic beeping of machines. The blood. Always the blood. He slammed the brakes instinctively, the tires squealing in protest. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him breathless and sweating. He swore under his breath, slamming the flask back into the console. He hated those memories. They clung to him like a persistent shadow, threatening to drag him back into the darkness he'd fought so hard to escape. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing himself to focus on the road ahead. He needed to keep moving. Up ahead, a shimmering mirage danced on the horizon. A truck stop, maybe. He could use some coffee, something to clear his head. He signaled, merging into the right lane. As he approached, the mirage solidified into a dusty, sun-bleached sign. Gas food. Last stop for 100 miles. He pulled into the gravel parking lot, the Mustang kicking up a cloud of dust. The place was deserted, save for a lone semi-truck idling near the gas pumps. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional caw of a crow circling overhead. He killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the pounding in his ears. He sat for a moment, collecting himself, trying to shake off the remnants of the memory. He ran a hand through his close-cropped hair, the gesture revealing a network of faint scars on his scalp. He opened the door and stepped out, the heat hitting him like a physical blow. He adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the surroundings. The gas station itself was a dilapidated, one-story building with peeling paint and a rusted Coca-Cola sign. A faded awning offered a meager attempt at providing shade. As he walked toward the entrance, he noticed a group of motorcycles parked haphazardly near the semi-truck. Harleys, mostly chrome gleaming in the harsh sunlight. He recognized the insignia on the back of one of the jackets, the Iron Serpents, a notorious biker gang, known for their disregard for the law and their penchant for violence. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd learned long ago to avoid trouble, to keep his head down and stay out of sight. But something about the way these guys were sprawled out, blocking the entrance, reeked of deliberate intimidation. He paused, considering his options. He could turn around, get back in the Mustang, and drive away. No one would blame him. But something held him back. A stubborn refusal to be intimidated, a flicker of the old fire that he thought he'd extinguished years ago. He took a deep breath and continued walking, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He knew that whatever peace he had found was about to be shattered. The past was catching up with him, and this time, he wasn't going to run. He was going to face it head-on. Iron Viper's territory. A low-frequency hum began it, a subtle vibration in the cracked asphalt that tickled the diner's foundation. Then came the crescendo, a raucous symphony of unmuffled exhausts, announcing the Iron Viper's arrival like a pack of metal wolves. They skidded to a halt before the skeletal remains of Ma's roadside eats, churning up miniature cyclones of dust. Sunlight flashed off polished chrome, highlighting the aggressive geometry of their customized machines. Clarence Viper Moreau killed his engine with a flourish, plunging the scene into relative quiet. His dismount was a study in practiced arrogance. The supple leather of his duster whispered like disturbed snakeskin. Eyes the washed-out blue of old jeans swept the desolate vista, daring defiance. A brown jet of tobacco stained the arid ground. "Well, ain't this a godforsaken paradise?" he drawled, the words dripping with sardonic amusement. Years spent bellowing over roaring engines and brawling in dive bars had rendered his voice a coarse rasp. His fellow Vipers, a ragtag assortment of weathered individuals, followed suit, limbs unfolding like rusty hinges as they surveyed their claimed territory. The bikes, the attitudes, the palpable fear all served as boundary markers. Viper sauntered towards the diner, a discarded hubcap skittering before his boot. The door, clinging to one hinge, emitted a mournful shriek as he forced it wider. Inside lay a chaotic tableau of overturned furniture, shattered glass, and ghosts of better times. He trailed a grimy hand across a torn vinyl booth, leaving a dark smear. "Welcome to the Ritz," he announced to the empty space, humor tinged with bitterness. Inside the garage, Rox's hammer struck a steady rhythm against metal, its clangorous music obscuring the Viper's arrival. She didn't acknowledge them, her concentration unbroken. A wrench, slick with oil, was clenched in her fist as she wrestled a stubborn bolt on a dismantled engine. The sharp reek of gasoline and lubricant clung to her, a stark contrast to Viper's cloying cologne. She was a mechanic, period. The Iron Vipers were simply background noise. Viper ambled over, leaning against the garage's entrance. "Rox," he said, stretching the name into a languid syllable. "Need something, Viper?" She responded, voice devoid of inflection, eyes glued to her task. He watched her for a beat, the silence tightening like a winch cable. He craved attention, the illusion of command, and Rox's cool indifference was a constant irritant. "Just admiring your dedication," he finally offered, the words losing some of their bravado. "Someone's got to keep these heaps running," she countered, finally raising her gaze. Her eyes, a shrewd and vibrant green, held a world-weariness that belied her youth. Viper shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. He couldn't decipher her, and it unsettled him. He straightened, forcing a predatory grin. "That's the spirit. Just have her ready for tonight. We got a delivery to make." Rox offered a curt nod, returning to the engine's oily embrace. Viper lingered a moment longer, then, with a frustrated snort, pivoted and stalked back towards the diner. He needed the solid weight of his revolver against his thigh, the eager gazes of his crew, the electric thrill of flirting with disaster. He needed to reassert his dominance. The desert was his domain, and he, Clarence Viper Moreau, its sovereign, a sovereign balancing on a precarious throne constructed of decaying metal and shattered aspirations. He just couldn't let anyone see it teeter. Unwanted attention. The rumble started subtly, a distant growl that vibrated through the floor of the Mustang. Statham barely registered it, more focused on the lukewarm coffee he'd picked up from the diner. He was parked a block away, facing the auto repair shop, waiting for Rox. The chrome gleamed in the midday sun, reflecting distorted images of the brick buildings lining the street. Then the rumble intensified, became a snarling chorus. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Headlights. Too many headlights. Before he could react, they were there. A phalanx of motorcycles, black chrome, and snarling exhausts, boxing him in. The Iron Vipers. They cut their engines in unison, the sudden silence amplifying the menace. Leather creaked, chains rattled, and the air filled with the scent of gasoline and something else malice. Clarence Viper Moreau dismounted, his boots hitting the asphalt with a practiced thump. He swaggered forward, his eyes, dark and hard, locked on Statham. "Well," Viper drawled, circling the Mustang like a predator sizing up its prey. "Look what we have here. A little pony lost in Viper territory." He spat on the ground, the glob landing inches from the front tire. "Pretty paint job. Shame if something were to happen to it." The other vipers chuckled, a low, guttural sound that echoed off the buildings. One of them, a hulking brute with a braided beard, ran a gloved hand along the hood. "Needs a little customizing, wouldn't you say, Viper?" Viper stopped at the driver's side window, leaning down, his face close to the glass. "You lost, friend? This ain't exactly a tourist destination." He noticed the coffee cup in Statham's hand. "Enjoying the scenery? Maybe you should be enjoying the hospital food after we're done with you." Inside the Mustang, Statham took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. The liquid was bitter, almost acrid. He lowered the cup, his gaze sweeping over the assembled gang. He didn't flinch, didn't react to their threats. Just observed. The glint of sunlight on brass knuckles, the faded tattoos snaking up necks, the barely concealed eagerness in their eyes. Viper's smile tightened. This wasn't going the way he planned. He'd expected fear, maybe pleading. Not this indifference. It unsettled him. He wanted Rox to see him, to witness his dominance, to remember who really ran things around here. But she wasn't here. And this stranger, he just sat there impassive. "You deaf, pretty boy?" Viper snarled, rapping his knuckles on the window. "I'm talking to you. You know who we are." Another Viper, a skinny kid with a greasy ponytail, piped up. "He probably thinks he can just waltz in here and do whatever he wants. Thinks he's too good for us." Viper shot the kid a look that silenced him. He needed to be in control, to orchestrate this. He couldn't let his boys get carried away. Not yet. He returned his attention to Statham, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "Listen close, city boy. This is our town. We make the rules. And right now, the rule is you get the hell out of here. And you take that fancy piece of scrap metal with you. Understand?" Statham didn't respond. He simply stared back at Viper, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the Mustang's engine. Viper felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He didn't like this. Not one bit. He was used to being feared, to being obeyed. This was something else entirely, and he didn't know how to handle it. Crossing the line, the sun hammered the parched asphalt, radiating a heat that warped the horizon and blurred the already stifling air. Viper slouched against his custom machine, a venomous green predator of steel and chrome, observing Statham with a predatory gaze. The man hadn't so much as twitched as the iron Vipers circled, their engines a guttural chorus of threat. Statham simply remained, poised beside that flamboyant, crimson Mustang, tending to its hood with a polishing cloth as if preparing it for a show. Rox, perched behind Diesel, popped bubbles with her gum, her gaze detached as she took in the tableau. Viper bristled at the way she regarded Statham, a cool assessment that seemed to dissect him, finding something he couldn't decipher. He craved her attention, her passionate intensity, focused solely on him. Not this apathy. "Hey, grease monkey!" Viper barked, his voice a rasping challenge. "Cat got your tongue, or are you just dense? We're addressing you." Statham persisted in his polishing, each motion languid and precise, effectively ignoring their presence. A low growl vibrated in Viper's chest. The familiar heat of fury ignited, a primal urge to dominate, to obliterate any perceived challenge. He'd forged the Iron Vipers on that principle, on an unshakable belief in their superiority. This blatant disregard was a corrosive acid. "Maybe he only understands internal combustion," Diesel quipped, a sly grin playing on his lips. The other Vipers rumbled with amusement, a low, bestial sound. "Perhaps he speaks in horsepower," Snake added, revving his engine with unnecessary aggression. Viper tuned them out. His focus remained glued to Statham, to the sinewy play of muscles beneath the man's faded t-shirt as he buffed the Mustang's hood to a mirror sheen. He was a walking, breathing affront. He reached into his saddlebag, the leather sighing softly, and withdrew a long-neck bottle of beer, still half full. The cool glass offered momentary respite against his sweaty palm. He levered the cap off with his teeth, spitting it onto the scorching asphalt. The saccharine sweetness of the beer provided fleeting relief, but the anger soon returned, sharper and more intense. He took a lengthy draught, the amber liquid searing its way down his parched throat. He needed action, any action, to shatter Statham's infuriating serenity. He needed to reassert his dominance, to remind them all of his position. He tested the bottle's weight in his grip. It felt substantial, promising. "All right, pretty boy," Viper ground out, his voice laced with menace. "You want to play dumb? Let's see if you can ignore this." And then, unleashing a guttural roar, he launched the bottle. It cut through the air, a fleeting spark of sunlight on glass. The Vipers stilled, their attention a cocktail of anticipation and unease. Rox's gum-chewing faltered. The bottle detonated against the Mustang's windshield with a sickening crunch. Glass imploded, cascading onto the dashboard and seats in a glittering, lethal rain. The sound was brutal, a violent punctuation mark in the heavy silence that followed. Statham ceased his polishing. He remained frozen for a heartbeat, his hands still resting on the Mustang's crimson flank. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his head. Viper met his gaze. He anticipated fear, perhaps rage. Instead, he found something far more unsettling, colder, more calculating. Not fury, exactly, but something assessing. A subtle twitch played at the corner of Statham's mouth, almost imperceptible, and his eyes narrowed to slits. A spark flared within their depths, a contained inferno that sent a prickle of apprehension down Viper's spine. It was a silent promise of retribution, a declaration of open warfare. Statham straightened, his movements economical and precise. He let the polishing rag fall to the ground, the soft thud amplified in the sudden hush. He advanced, one step, then another, his boots grinding on the shattered glass. The atmosphere crackled with palpable tension. The Iron Vipers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado visibly deflating. Even Rox seemed to draw a shallow breath. A cold fist clenched in Viper's gut. He'd provoked a response, undeniably. Yet a gnawing premonition told him he'd crossed an invisible barrier. The man approaching was far from the pushover he'd envisioned. Respect earned. The Mustang coughed to a stop, the engine's grumble the only sound that dared to break the oppressive silence. Statham killed the ignition, the sudden quiet amplifying the rustle of wind through the parched weeds lining the road. He didn't hurry. He took his time, each movement precise, economical, as if calibrating himself for the storm about to break. The car door swung open with a low, metallic thunk. He unfolded himself from the driver's seat, rising to his full height, a silent monolith against the backdrop of the setting sun. Dust motes danced in the golden light, swirling around his boots as they hit the asphalt. He didn't look at Viper immediately, instead scanning the assembled bikers, their faces hard, expectant. The air crackled with testosterone and anticipation. The metallic tang of adrenaline pricked at his nostrils. Viper shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking a nervous counterpoint to the Viper's forced bravado. He hadn't expected this. Rox's dismissive laughter still stung. But this was something different. An unsettling calm radiated from Statham, a stillness that felt more dangerous than any outward aggression. Well, Viper drawled, forcing a grin. "Took you long enough to find your balls, old man." He spat a wad of tobacco juice onto the parched ground. The gesture was meant to intimidate, but it lacked conviction. Statham finally turned his gaze on Viper. His eyes, the color of cold steel, held no anger, no fear, only a weary resignation, as if he'd seen this scene play out 1,000 times before. He registered the tremor in Viper's hand, the way his knuckles were white against the handlebars. Fear. Good. Fear was healthy. "I wasn't aware they were lost," Statham replied, his voice a low rumble that carried clearly across the space. "I simply prefer to choose my battles." A ripple of murmurs ran through the Vipers. They'd expected bluster, maybe even a show of bravado. This quiet defiance was unsettling. "You think you're so tough, huh?" Viper's voice was tight, strained. He needed to reassert control, to regain the upper hand that was slipping away like sand. "Think you can just waltz in here and disrespect the Iron Vipers?" Statham took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The sun dipped lower, painting long, distorted shadows on the road, turning the scene into a macabre tableau. He stopped a few feet from Viper, his gaze unwavering. The scent of gasoline and cheap leather hung heavy in the air. "Disrespect is earned, Viper," Statham said, his voice barely a whisper, yet every syllable cut through the air like a shard of glass. "Just like respect." Viper's face flushed crimson. He leaned forward, his voice a snarl. "You think you can earn my respect, old man? You think you can even lay a finger on me?" Statham tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The gesture was devoid of humor, more predatory than amused. "That depends, Viper. Are you offering me the opportunity?" The silence descended again, heavier this time, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Every eye was on Viper, waiting for his response. He could back down, try to salvage what little remained of his authority. But pride, ego, and the simmering humiliation of Rox's laughter wouldn't allow it. He clenched his jaw, the muscles in his neck bulging. "Damn right I am. Let's see how tough you really are, without that fancy car to hide behind." He spat again, the spittle landing inches from Statham's boots. Statham didn't flinch. He simply looked at Viper, his expression unreadable. The air hung thick and still, pregnant with the promise of violence. "Then respect," Statham said, his voice cold as the grave, "is about to be earned." Dismantling the Vipers. The first punch landed like a thunderclap. Viper, puffed up with cheap beer and the burning need to reassert his authority in front of Rox, swung wide. Statham sidestepped it with a grace that belied his size and brought his fist crashing into Viper's jaw. The biker staggered, surprise blooming on his face like a grotesque flower. "Show's over, Clarence," Statham rumbled, his voice dangerously low. The rest of the Vipers surged forward, a snarling mass of leather and steel. Rox instinctively recoiled, pressing herself against the dusty wall of the bar. This wasn't a bar brawl. This was a slaughter waiting to happen. The air thickened with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. Statham moved with a controlled fury. He didn't block. He redirected. A biker lunged with a rusty pipe, and Statham grabbed his wrist, using the momentum to fling him headfirst into a stack of overturned beer kegs. Another came at him with a knife, but Statham intercepted his arm, the crack of bone sickeningly loud. The knife clattered on the floor. Rox watched, mesmerized. She'd seen violence before, plenty of it. But this was different. This wasn't the chaotic, drunken rage she was used to. This was precise, calculated destruction. He was a whirlwind of controlled motion, turning their aggression against them. A Viper, burly and tattooed, tried to blindside Statham with a pool cue. Statham ducked under the swing and grabbed the cue from the biker's hands. With a swift, practiced motion, he snapped it in half over his knee. The jagged end became an impromptu weapon, jabbed into the biker's gut, sending him sprawling. Rox felt a shiver crawl down her spine. It wasn't just fear. There was something else mixed in, something she couldn't quite name. Admiration, maybe? Disgust? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't look away. He used the environment with a terrifying efficiency. A bar stool became a projectile, sent spinning into a Viper's face. A pitcher of beer was smashed over another's head, the shards of glass adding insult to injury. He moved through the chaos like a phantom, leaving a trail of broken bodies and shattered pride in his wake. Viper, his face contorted with rage and fear, finally managed to get to his feet. He charged at Statham, bellowing like a wounded bull. Statham waited, calm as a statue. As Viper closed in, Statham stepped aside and delivered a vicious kick to his knee. Viper crumpled to the floor, howling in agony. Statham loomed over him, his shadow falling across Viper's face. "You wanted a show, Clarence? Here it is." He reached down and grabbed Viper by the collar, hauling him up. The movement revealed the fear in Viper's eyes, a stark contrast to the bravado he'd displayed only moments before. Rox watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw the flicker of doubt in Viper's gaze, the realization that he was outmatched, outclassed. It was a feeling she knew well. She'd seen that same look in the mirror too many times. Statham didn't hit him again. He simply held Viper there, his grip unyielding. "Tell your boys to back down," he said, his voice a low growl, "or things will get a lot worse." Viper, his face a mask of pain and humiliation, croaked out, "Back off. All of you back off." The remaining Vipers, battered and bruised, hesitated for a moment before reluctantly obeying their leader's command. The bar fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the injured and the drip, drip, drip of beer from the shattered kegs. Statham released Viper, letting him slump back to the floor. He surveyed the scene, his gaze sweeping over the broken bodies and shattered furniture. Then, he turned and looked directly at Rox. There was something unreadable in his eyes, a question, a challenge. Rox met his gaze, her expression a carefully constructed mask of indifference. But inside, she was churning. The world she knew, the world she thought she understood, had just been irrevocably altered. Viper's last stand. Viper spat a curse, the sharp bite of burnt rubber filling his lungs as he bullied the chopper to life. Rox's vacant expression haunted him worse than any broken bone. He'd invested everything. The Iron Viper's name, their feared reputation, the Iron Fist, and she looked at him like he was weak old roadkill. He had to bolt, not with that gaze boring into him, not with the creeping sensation of imminent collapse. He wrenched the throttle. The engines roared a defiant shout against the stunned silence that had blanketed the clubhouse courtyard. Twin beams sliced through the encroaching twilight as he snaked onto the service road. He craved open space, the lash of wind against his scalp. An escape from the dread Rox's indifference had ignited within him. A glance in the mirror half expected to catch the bewildered, betrayed faces of his crew. Instead, the courtyard remained deserted. The Iron Viper's neon sign, now a garish reminder of his crumbling reign. He twisted the throttle further, pushing the machine, the speedometer needle twitching past 80, then 90. The highway beckoned, promising anonymity in its endless black ribbon. Then he saw him. A figure peeled itself from the roadside shadows, a silhouette etched against the fading light. Statham, immobile, arms at his sides, an unsettling calm seemed to radiate from him. Viper scoffed. The man was delusional if he thought he could stop him. He hurtled forward, aiming the bike directly at Statham, a cruel satisfaction blooming within. He'd flatten the fool, turn him into a greasy smear on the asphalt. A fitting finale to this farce. But as collision neared, Statham shifted. No lunge, no leap, simply a measured step forward. He raised a hand, palm open, as if greeting a friend he hadn't seen in years. Viper had no chance. With a sickening crunch, Statham's hand met the bike's front suspension. Not a blow, not a strike, just a deceptively delicate, almost casual pressure. The metal screamed, the front wheel crumpled, and the chopper lurched violently, ejecting Viper like discarded refuse. He slammed into the ground, winded, the gritty taste of dust and blood coating his tongue. Dazed, he scrambled up, adrenaline surging. The chopper lay crippled, its engine coughing its last, a mangled sculpture of steel and chrome. Statham approached, face a mask, eyes like honed steel. Viper spat, grasping for a shred of control. "Think this is finished?" he croaked, voice raspy. "Think you've won?" Statham offered no reply, continuing his advance, movements like a predator stalking prey. Viper knew this was the end, his last stand. He lunged, throwing a desperate, clumsy punch fueled by rage. Statham glided aside, clamping on a Viper's wrist with crushing force. Agonizing fire erupted up Viper's arm, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Statham didn't release his hold. He twisted, leveraging Viper's own weight against him, sending him sprawling. This time, Viper struggled to rise. Statham loomed above, a dark shape in the dying light. A single, merciless kick connected with Viper's ribs, the crack echoing in the stillness. Viper gasped, vision blurring. Something snapped. He gazed up at Statham, a chilling realization taking root. It wasn't just about the Iron Vipers, nor Rox's betrayal. It was about him. His hubris, his brutality, his utter contempt for anything beyond brute force. Statham raised a fist. Viper closed his eyes, offering no scream, no plea. He simply waited. The blow landed, plunging him into oblivion. The fading sound of distant sirens echoed, a mournful lament for a fallen tyrant. The price of disrespect. Viper tasted blood, the metallic tang sharp on his tongue. He was on his back, the cracked asphalt of brutal canvas beneath him. Above, the brute stood, a silhouette against the flickering neon sign of the Moonlight Diner. A low groan escaped Viper's lips. He tried to push himself up, but a searing pain shot through his ribs, a brutal reminder of the kick that had sent him sprawling. "Stay down, old man." Statham's voice rumbled, devoid of any emotion, as indifferent as the desert wind. Rox watched from the edge of the melee, her breath caught in her throat. Viper defeated? Humiliated? It was something she hadn't thought possible. He was always so loud, so sure of himself, a swaggering monument to intimidation. Now he was just a broken man on the ground. The sight stirred something uncomfortable within her. Pity, perhaps, mixed with a strange, burgeoning respect for the man who had done this. The other Iron Vipers, those who hadn't already fled, stood frozen, their bravado evaporated. The air hung thick with the scent of gasoline, spilled beer, and fear. No one dared to move. No one dared to challenge the figure looming over their leader. The silence was deafening, broken only by Viper's ragged breathing. Statham turned his gaze upon them, a slow, deliberate sweep. His eyes, cold and hard, seemed to bore into each man, stripping away their tough guy facades. He didn't need to say a word. The message was clear. Defiance would be met with swift and brutal retribution. One by one, they broke. A shuffling of boots on gravel, the roar of engines sputtering to life, and then they were gone, scattering into the night like cockroaches fleeing the light. Rox watched them go, a bitter taste in her mouth. Loyalty, she realized, was a fragile thing, easily shattered by fear. Statham didn't pursue them. He had made his point. He looked back down at Viper, who was now spitting blood onto the ground. "Next time," Statham said, his voice low and menacing, "think twice before you threaten someone." He stepped over Viper's prone form, his boots crunching on shards of glass and discarded chrome. Rox found herself mesmerized, drawn to the raw power that radiated from him. He moved with a purpose, a silent predator surveying its kill. He stopped near the shattered window of the diner, the neon glow painting his face in harsh, contrasting colors. The Moonlight Diner, once a beacon of greasy comfort, was now a scene of utter devastation. Chairs lay overturned, tables were splintered, and the air reeked of destruction. Statham surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. Was it satisfaction he felt? Regret? Rox couldn't tell. He picked up a piece of broken glass, turning it over in his hand, the sharp edges glinting in the neon light. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed it aside. It landed with a soft thud in a puddle of beer. He looked at Rox, his eyes lingering on her for a moment. There was no judgment in his gaze, no accusation. Just an acknowledgement, a silent understanding of her place in this mess. It made her skin crawl. She didn't want his understanding, didn't want his pity. She didn't know what she wanted. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the diner. The roar of his engine faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than before. The neon sign of the Moonlight Diner flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows across the ravaged scene. Rox remained, staring at the spot where he had stood, the image of his cold, indifferent eyes burned into her memory. The price of disrespect, she knew, had just been paid, and she had a feeling the interest was going to be astronomical. Legend of the Mustang. The Mustang ticked over, its rumble a guttural purr emanating from beneath the dented hood. Statham's gaze swept over the aftermath, a collection of dazed expressions, fallen motorcycles reflecting the waning sunlight like shards of a broken mirror, and Viper splayed near the verge, a marionette with severed strings. No boastfulness colored his features, only a cold calculation. Rox felt her insides twist with a turmoil of emotions. The abatement of immediate danger, the utter unreality of the spectacle, and a burgeoning, uneasy admiration. He leaned into the car and extracted sunglasses from the glove box, slipping them on against the fiery sky. The fractured windshield, a chaotic mosaic of cracks, formed a bizarre, sun-drenched corona around his head. It wasn't a liability, but a mark of survival. A badge. The weapon he'd wrestled from Viper remained untouched, a gleaming, inert bauble beside a man who required none. Sinking into the driver's seat, the aged leather sighed softly under his weight. No grand gestures, no triumphant pronouncements, simply the quiet assurance of someone in complete control. His eyes flickered to Rox, a brief, indecipherable communication, followed by a nearly imperceptible nod. Not farewell, precisely, but acknowledgment given, judgment silently rendered. He engaged the gear, tires biting into the gravel as he executed a flawless turn. The engine's roar ripped through the stunned quiet, a raw, unbridled sound. Then, he peeled away, heading west into the incandescent sunset, the Mustang now a solid darkness against the blazing canvas. The damaged glass caught the dying light, exploding into a fleeting, hypnotic spectrum. Rox watched him vanish, a dust devil rising in his wake. The air reeked of scorched rubber and spilled fuel. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant serenade of crickets and the whimpers of injured bikers tending their wounds. Viper remained unmoving, his face a mask of agony and shame. She scanned her crew, their usual swagger replaced by gaping bewilderment. They waited, anticipating a directive, a restoration of order, a return to the status quo. But her voice was lost. He'd overturned the playbook, rewritten the rules in a language of raw power. A cough shattered the stillness. What? What the hell was that? A young biker stuttered, his voice thin with disbelief. An older, more world-weary member spat on the asphalt. Legend, he growled, eyes tracking the phantom point where the Mustang had dissolved. That's what that was. A goddamn legend walking. The words hung like a tangible presence. The legend of the Mustang. The legend of the stranger who'd materialized from nowhere and dismantled their world with his bare hands and a relic of a car. The legend of Statham. Rox shivered despite the lingering heat. A legend, and she was mired here, ankle-deep in the grime and ruin of a life that suddenly felt paltry and insignificant. She examined her hands, rough and etched with scars, stained with the black of grease and ink. The hands of a biker, a foot soldier in Viper's army. But were they also capable of something more? Did they deserve a different fate? The setting sun cast long, grotesque silhouettes that stretched across the road. Rox knew, with a conviction that resonated deep within her, that nothing would ever be the same. The legend of the Mustang had irrevocably altered the landscape. She gazed at the horizon, and for the first time in years, she perceived not simply the endless strip of asphalt leading to oblivion, but possibility. An opening. A future unburdened by Viper's dominion and the gang's trivial conflicts. She squared her shoulders, the leather of her jacket protesting with a soft creak. The knot in her stomach persisted, but its nature had transformed. No longer dread, but expectation. She couldn't predict her next move, her ultimate destination, but one thing was beyond dispute. She wouldn't remain. The legend of the Mustang had ridden into the sunset, but it had left embers behind. A spark of inquiry, and Rox understood, with a growing surge of optimism, that she was compelled to seek the answer.